The English countryside has long been painted as a picture of calm serenity. Rolling green hills, soft breezes carrying the scent of blooming roses, and villages that seem frozen in time. At the heart of one such village stood the Harrington estate, a manor of stone and ivy, known as much for its grandeur as for its traditions. Every Sunday, Lady Eleanor Harrington hosted her famous afternoon tea, a gathering that combined refinement, wealth, and whispers of influence. But on a spring afternoon in 1954, that tradition ended in blood. The table was set with delicate porcelain, the kind imported from France, hand-painted with golden vines. Fine silver spoons glistened under the sun that filtered through tall windows. The guests, local elites, scholars, and friends of the Harrington family, chatted politely over warm scones and clotted cream. Everything seemed perfect, until the shrill scream of a maid pierced the atmosphere. Lady Eleanor was slumped in her chair, her pale silk dress stained with dark blotches. Her teacup, now overturned, rolled gently across the white lace tablecloth. The guests froze, their laughter dying instantly. At first, whispers of a fainting spell rippled through the room. But when the doctor who lived nearby rushed to her side, he shook his head gravely. Lady Eleanor wasn't faint. She was gone, the manor filled with panic. No one could understand what had happened. No glass shattered. No knife was raised. There was only the soft clinking of teacups and the stifling silence of disbelief. But when the inspector arrived, he said something chilling. This wasn't nature. This was murder. And as eyes darted across the room, suspicion brewed with every nervous glance. The weapon? Invisible. The killer? Sitting among them. The clue? A single fingerprint, left on the very teacup that had touched Lady Eleanor's lips. The great wooden doors of the Harrington Manor slammed shut, echoing through the corridors like a final verdict. Inspector Charles Whitmore, a sharp-eyed man with a reputation for solving the unsolvable, stood tall before the guests. His crisp voice cut through the air. No one leaves this estate. Until I know who killed Lady Eleanor, you are all suspects. Gasps erupted. A nervous cough from the vicar, a trembling handkerchief in Mrs. Caldwell's grip, a bead of sweat running down young Thomas Harrington's forehead. The inspector's eyes swept over the table. He noted every detail, the half-eaten sandwiches, the untouched teacups, the one cup tipped over near the victim's still form. He leaned closer. A faint trace of something unusual clung to the rim, something bitter beyond tea leaves. Poison. But it wasn't just the poison that intrigued him. It was the fingerprint. A smudge pressed against the delicate porcelain, half hidden beneath the gilded vines. A mistake, perhaps, or a silent confession. The realization settled uneasily over the room. The killer was one of them, hiding behind calm faces and polite manners. The first to face the inspector was Margaret Caldwell, a longtime friend of Lady Eleanor. She sat rigidly in her chair, her pearl necklace trembling slightly against her throat. Mrs. Caldwell, Whitmore began, you were seated to Lady Eleanor's right. Did you notice anything unusual? Her lips tightened. No, Inspector. She seemed perfectly well. We were discussing her plans for the spring gala. Did she pour her own tea? No, I believe the butler did. Then she reached for the cup herself. Whitmore's sharp gaze flickered to the table. The butler, a stoic man named Harold, stood silently near the wall, his face unreadable. He had served the Harringtons for decades. Would he betray them now? But as the questioning continued, another detail emerged. Several guests recalled Lady Eleanor looking troubled earlier that week. Whispers of family tension, financial disputes, a quarrel with her nephew, Thomas, about the inheritance. The inspector scribbled notes furiously. Murder often grew from seeds of greed or vengeance. Yet the fingerprints still gnawed at him. That porcelain teacup carried the truth. Thomas Harrington, just 25, had the look of a man cornered. His dark hair clung damply to his forehead as he shifted uncomfortably. Thomas, Whitmore said, several have mentioned disagreements between you and your aunt. Care to explain? It was nothing. Thomas snapped, his voice breaking. Just discussions. She was stubborn, controlling, always reminding me of how unworthy I was to inherit the estate. Did you stand to gain financially from her death? Silence. Thomas swallowed hard. Every eye in the room bore into him. She was changing her will, he finally muttered. I heard rumors, but I didn't kill her. I loved her, despite everything. Whitmore's pen scratched the paper. Motive, inheritance. But was motive enough? He studied Thomas's trembling hands. No stains. No signs of handling poison. And yet, he had been close enough to switch cups, to touch the porcelain. "Did you drink your tea, Thomas?" the inspector asked. Thomas hesitated. "No, I wasn't thirsty." The words added fuel to suspicion. The maid's hands shook as she held out a small vial, its contents faintly glimmering. "I found it in the bin, sir, behind the flour sacks." Inspector Whitmore uncorked it and brought it cautiously to his nose. The acrid scent of arsenic stung his senses. His suspicion hardened. This was no accident. "Whose vial is this?" he demanded. All eyes darted around the room. Harold the butler stepped forward. "That does not belong to the household, sir. It was brought here." The inspector's gaze narrowed. A killer had slipped poison into Lady Eleanor's tea under the guise of civility. It was bold, risky, calculated. He set the vial down carefully. Someone in this room hid it. Someone who thought the kitchen was safe. They were wrong. The fingerprint, however, remained the central mystery. The storm outside grew louder, lashing against the manor's walls as though echoing the chaos within. Hours dragged on. The guests whispered in corners, their refined composure cracking under the weight of fear. Whitmore studied them like chess pieces. Each had reason. Each had opportunity. Mrs. Caldwell, jealous of Lady Eleanor's influence. The vicar, desperate for donations to repair the crumbling chapel. Thomas, hungry for inheritance. The butler, silent, perhaps too silent, after years of service. Yet suspicion was a fickle thing. Whoever poisoned Lady Eleanor had done so with precision. That required knowledge, patience, nerve. Whitmore's attention shifted back to the table. He traced the rim of the fatal teacup with his gloved finger. A simple object, yet powerful enough to undo lives. And there it was again, the faint, betraying fingerprint. The guests leaned forward as the officer handed Whitmore a small envelope. With deliberate calm, he unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the results. Then, silence. Finally, he looked up. "This fingerprint does not belong to Lady Eleanor. It belongs to Harold, the butler." A collective gasp filled the room. Harold's face remained eerily still, his hands clasped behind his back. "Explain yourself," Whitmore demanded. Harold's voice was calm, almost resigned. "I poured the tea, sir. Naturally, my prints would be on the cup." It was true, logical, but Whitmore wasn't convinced. The placement of the print suggested it wasn't from pouring. It was from handling, from pressing the cup in a way that felt deliberate. The guests stared at Harold, their trust wavering. Whitmore stood at the head of the table. "We will recreate this tea service exactly as it happened. Every detail matters." Reluctantly, the guests complied. Plates were reset. Cups were arranged. Harold, under watchful eyes, demonstrated how he poured the tea. His movements were precise, almost mechanical. But as Whitmore observed, he noticed something odd. Lady Eleanor's cup had not been placed directly before her at first. Harold had set it slightly to the side. She had reached for it herself. "Why?" Whitmore pressed. Harold hesitated. "Perhaps I was distracted." It was nothing. But Whitmore's instincts screamed otherwise. A servant prided himself on precision. To misplace a cup was no accident. The investigation turned toward the possibility of a deliberate frame job. Whitmore spoke firmly. "A poisoned cup is not just about murder, it's about manipulation. Whoever touched this cup wanted Harold to hang for it." The vicar raised a trembling hand. But how would they place his fingerprint? Whitmore explained. By lifting a print from another object, silverware, perhaps, and pressing it onto the cup using simple powders. Criminals have done it before. The room went still. This was no ordinary crime of passion. It was planned with elegance, calculated with patience. Harold's composure faltered for the first time. His voice cracked. "Someone wants me destroyed." As the night deepened, Whitmore ordered a full search of the manor. Servants scurried nervously, while officers combed through rooms. In Lady Eleanor's private study, hidden beneath ledgers and correspondence, a folded letter was discovered. Its seal was broken. Its contents, explosive. It revealed that Lady Eleanor had indeed planned to change her will, cutting Thomas out entirely and leaving the estate to a charitable trust. Thomas's face drained of color when the letter was read aloud. She wasn't serious, he whispered. But the words betrayed him. His motive was now undeniable. Yet Whitmore's instincts told him this wasn't the end. If Thomas had reason, others had opportunity. And the fingerprint mystery still loomed, unsolved. Lady Eleanor had written in the letter, I no longer know whom I can trust in this house." The words seemed to echo through the hall as the investigation pressed forward. As dawn approached, Whitmore dug deeper into Lady Eleanor's past. The study revealed more than just her new will. It unveiled a woman who lived surrounded by distrust. Letters showed strained relations not only with Thomas but with nearly everyone at the table. She had accused Mrs. Caldwell of gossiping about her affairs. She had refused the vicar's requests for church donations. She had threatened to dismiss Harold after decades of service if he didn't know his place. Lady Eleanor, for all her elegance, had enemies in her own drawing room. This was no crime of random violence. It was the climax of resentments carefully bottled up, finally uncorked over tea. The revelation shifted Whitmore's perspective. The poison had not just killed Eleanor, it had been chosen as a symbol. A subtle, polite weapon for a very impolite crime. Attention inevitably returned to Harold. His life had been one of service, his loyalty unquestioned, until now. He stood before Whitmore, stoic, but his eyes carried exhaustion. "Inspector, I have served this family for 30 years. I poured every cup of tea, polished every silver spoon, and guarded every secret. And yet, I am accused like a criminal." Whitmore studied him. "Perhaps it is because you know too much, Harold. Enough to resent her. Enough to see her death as freedom." Harold's jaw tightened. "She was difficult, yes, cruel at times, but she was also my responsibility. I did not kill her." The guests shifted uneasily. It was difficult to know whether his words reflected devotion or denial. The fingerprint tied him to the teacup, but Whitmore's instinct told him the truth was not so simple. The village vicar had been quiet most of the night, murmuring prayers under his breath. Finally, Whitmore addressed him directly. "Reverend, your chapel has been struggling. You asked Lady Eleanor for help, didn't you?" The vicar looked down. "Yes." She refused. "She said faith should not depend on her fortune." "That must have angered you." "It saddened me, but I would not poison her for it." Whitmore noticed the reverend's hands trembling. He thought of the poison vial hidden in the kitchen. The church, in desperate need of funds. A man of God, perhaps tempted by desperation. But still, no evidence tied the vicar directly to the fatal teacup. His guilt lived only in possibilities, not proof. Margaret Caldwell had known Eleanor since childhood. Their bond had survived decades, but Whitmore sensed bitterness. He questioned her again, pushing past her polite smiles. "Mrs. Caldwell, you knew Lady Eleanor better than anyone. Did she confide in you about her will?" A pause. Then, reluctantly, she mentioned wanting to give the estate away. "I told her it was foolish. The Harrington name should remain with family." "Family or you?" Whitmore asked, watching her eyes flicker. She pursed her lips. "I had no claim to her fortune, Inspector." But Eleanor's notes told a different story. She had accused Margaret of circling like a vulture. Their friendship had soured into rivalry. In many ways, Margaret had just as much to gain as Thomas, perhaps more, since she had the trust of everyone in the room. The investigation turned scientific. Whitmore requested further analysis of the teacup residue. The laboratory confirmed what he already suspected. Arsenic had been mixed with the sugar. This meant the poisoner had known Eleanor's habits. She always took her tea with 2 spoons of sugar, never milk. This detail narrowed the suspects. Not everyone would pay attention to her personal ritual. But Harold would. Thomas would. And Margaret, as her closest friend, certainly would. The realization weighed heavily. The killer was someone who not only despised Lady Eleanor, but also knew her intimately. By morning, the letter about the will became the focus. The guests argued openly now, the politeness of the evening shattered. Thomas claimed the will change was unfair, Margaret insisted Eleanor was irrational, and the vicar denounced greed as the root of her downfall. Whitmore listened carefully. Inheritance was the thread tying their motives together. Eleanor's decision to cut her nephew out had enraged him. Her refusal to help her friend and vicar had bred bitterness. Even Harold, facing possible dismissal, had reason to resent her. Motive was abundant. But motive alone did not place poison in her cup. Finally, Whitmore returned to the fingerprint. He examined it under magnification again. This time, something new stood out. The print was unusually clear, almost too perfect. If Harold had simply touched the cup while serving, it should have been smudged. Instead, it looked deliberate, pressed on carefully. This aligned with his earlier theory. The fingerprint had been planted. Harold was not the killer. He was the scapegoat. This revelation narrowed the suspects further. Only someone clever, someone familiar with subtle details, would attempt such a frame. And only someone with confidence would think they could deceive an inspector. Whitmore gathered the guests in the drawing room. His voice was calm but final. Lady Eleanor was poisoned with arsenic placed in her sugar. The fingerprint on her cup was planted, not natural. The true killer sought to frame Harold. But the evidence points elsewhere. The room fell silent. He turned to Margaret Caldwell. You knew her habits best. You had the opportunity to touch the cup when others were distracted. And you knew Harold's prints would be easy to copy, since he polished silver daily. You used his loyalty against him. Margaret's face froze. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then she exhaled, a trembling sound that betrayed everything. She ruined me, she whispered. I gave her my whole life, and she mocked me. She took everything from me. I only wanted to end her cruelty. The guests stared in shock as the truth settled in. The elegant, lifelong friend had been the killer. Margaret was taken into custody. The other guests, though shaken, felt a strange relief. The fear of suspicion lifted, but the grief remained. Lady Eleanor's death was not just a crime. It was a betrayal woven into the fabric of friendship and trust. Harold stood quietly, his loyalty vindicated but scarred. Thomas, though spared accusation, carried the shame of his greed. The vicar returned to his chapel, perhaps with more doubts than faith. The manor itself seemed different now. The roses no longer smelled sweet, the porcelain cups no longer gleamed. The legacy of Lady Eleanor's final tea would forever stain the Harrington estate. In his final report, Inspector Whitmore wrote, "It was not poison alone that killed Lady Eleanor Harrington. It was envy, bitterness, and betrayal, served neatly in a porcelain cup." The case became a cautionary tale in the village, retold in hushed voices. People remembered not just the crime, but the lesson it carried. Murder often hides behind the masks of civility, elegance, and even friendship. One fingerprint on a teacup had been enough to unravel it all. For those who knew her, Lady Eleanor's story lingered as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous betrayals often come from those seated closest to us at the table.